Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast. As always, my name's Chris, and today we're going to be breaking down the absolute insanity that was Cage Warriors 174, in which we saw the Prizefighter tournament finally take place, one night Grand Prix, where we saw Shirzad Qadrian, Alexander Loof, Aidan Stephen, and Wesley Meyer go to war to see who could get that 50k and who could get that title shot. We're going to dive straight into the prize fighter stuff first, and then we'll talk about all the other stuff on the card. Truly a nuts card. I think we had 13 or 14 finishes out of 20 fights. You know, that it felt like it just flew by, even though I was sat there from 3 p.m. till 11 p.m. just looking away at my keyboard and typing up all my notes so that I could be as perfectly prepared for this as possible. It was just a wild one, and it went by so quickly. We had knockout of the year contenders, finish of the year contenders. We had unreal, unreal fight of the year contender for my money. If you're into grappling, it was great, and just generally a bunch of prospects just adding to their portfolio with great wins over credible opponents. So this is going to be a long one, guys. Strap in. It's going to be 20 fights that we have to talk about, but we'll start where it matters most, and that's where the 50k is in the Prizefighter tournament. So we'll just start off by saying I think the Prizefighter tournament and just the way that it worked out was unreal. You know, they put all these names into a hat. We saw them do the draw on the MMA Fan Show podcast. Usually, you know, it's tough because it's a draw at the end of the day, and this wasn't there wasn't any matchmaking here prior to the fights being pulled out of a hat. And you know, sometimes you do run that risk of, okay, we're going to get like really lopsided matchmaking, or the best guys aren't even going to make the tournament. And that's kind of what we had with Michele Martignoni, who, you know, for a lot of people's money is probably the best fighter at bantamweight that was in this tournament, and yet he fell into an alternate bout because he didn't get pulled out of the hat quick enough to be a semi-finalist, right? So that was already pretty crazy. But I personally loved it because the MMA gods speak for themselves, and the fact that we got Shirzad Qadrian versus Wesley Meyer, which was a huge rematch, that was awesome. Alexander Luff and Aidan Stephen was always going to be that classic striker versus grappler type. And then Giordano versus Martignoni, a great like all Italian scrap. And it really turned out to be that. But we'll start right at the top because we have to talk about Shirzad Qadrian. We really do. The prize fighter winner, the inaugural winner of this prize fighter series of tournaments that they're doing, because they're going to be back in Newcastle with another tournament at welterweight, and they're going to do a few more. But Shirzad Qadrian's the inaugural winner, and he did it in really dominant fashion, beating, you know, fighting for 30 minutes on the night. Two fights all going the distance for Qadrian, getting the extension round as well in the first fight, which was only supposed to be 2 rounds. It was an interesting one for Qadrian because I saw a lot of people shitting on him after the fight, like, oh, it's boring, a snooze fest, holding on to a guy's legs. At the end of the day, guys, it's 2 fights in one night, and I don't know. I can't. I personally, you know, I'm a cynical bastard, and I will sit here and sometimes be overly critical. But when a guy's had 2 fights in one night, when he's fought for half an hour, when his opponent isn't offering much resistance in the grappling department, what do you want him to do? Like, truthfully, what do you want a standout wrestler, a guy who has this incredible base? What do you want him to do? Great, we want him to get finishes, we want him to ground and pound submissions, but he's not fighting bums. Wesley Meyer and Alexander Luff are great defensive grapplers, guys who, you know, they might get grounded, but they're not going to give up their necks. They're not going to give up many positions. So it's a very interesting one to see the almost the negativity coming out. Like, this guy's 23 years old. He's 7-1. His whole family's in Iran. Like, he's chasing this dream in the UK, fighting out of Diesel Gym. Someone we should probably get behind, and people are just trying to tear him down a little bit, I think. But personally, the Wesley Meyer fight was really intriguing for me. You had Meyer, who's in his absolute prime, riding a 3 fight win streak. Qadrian's sole loss was to this guy, and the first round starts, and Meyer takes it, in my opinion, because Qadrian's again shooting from wide, just shooting and shooting and shooting, like out in the open, wide open, and Maya's just stuffing it, and he's being able to wrestle up, and he's being able to transition without much resistance. And eventually, just towards the end of the round, you see Qadrian get some success, but it was this repetitive attacking of the single leg. And I think I tweeted it right after the first round. I was like, if this is how Qadrian is going to fight for the rest of this fight, Wesley Myers getting into that final, like, there's no chance Qadrian wins this. But what we didn't, actually, I'll set this up by saying before this prize fighter tournament, I picked Qadrian to win. And I picked him to win based off two things. I think he's the best wrestler in the group, and I think that showed. And also, I think he's got the best gas tank. But after that first round, I didn't really see it. Like, I thought he was going to gas quickly because it was a relentless pace. It was these, he wasn't setting up his takedowns. He wasn't making it easy for himself. Like, if you go watch Milad Ahady versus Thomas Paul, which we'll talk about later on, that's how you make wrestling look effortless. Ahadi, barely wasted a breath, just setting up his takedowns beautifully, ducking under some of the shots from Thomas Paul, using that leverage to just ground him. But Qadrian was just like hanging onto a single leg and just trying to rip Maia to the floor. But it worked eventually. Qadrian lacing up the legs on the ground in the second round, like passing to half guard, just beautiful work on the mat. Maia cracks Qadrian late in that round, like then goes for a flying knee, but like jumps over Qadrian and Qadrian ducks. But generally, it was, Qadrian was putting a pace on Maia that Maia couldn't keep up. Now, Maia's a great athlete, and he didn't come out of this fight looking any worse. Like, he still gave a good account of himself, but Qadrian really just dogged him, just absolutely dogged him, just went with a crazy pace and just outgrappled him. It wasn't pretty. It was ugly. In fact, it really was. But the grappling pace was too much for Maia, and Qadrian being able to exercise that demon, getting back the only loss of his professional career, improving to 6-1, and making that final, I think, was really important. But the pace at which he fought, I was a little bit concerned whether he'd be able to go again in the final. And speaking of the final, obviously Alexander Luff was one half of that final, and we'll talk about that fight specifically in just a second. But Alexander Luff's path here, he took on Aiden Stephen right after the Wesley Meyer versus Shirzad Qadrian fight, and Luff looked outstanding. After the first round, he'd cracked Aiden Stephen, he dropped him. The fight could have been stopped, in all honesty, but I personally scored that 10-8 round for Alexander Luff. So Aiden Stephen had it all to do in the second round, but Stephen's a dog, and he showed it. Some of the positions he was able to get into, being able to attack the back to try and get to the neck, like he left a good account of himself in the grappling department. But Luff doesn't get enough respect for being defensively sound in the grappling. He did get grounded quite a lot in the fight with Stephen, but dropped Stephen twice. Was fighting the hands really well, really patient on the ground, like not spazzing, trying to get back to his feet. Like, as much as we categorize him as a mad guy, he is chaotic, but there's a level of that chaos being measured, I think, and it showed because it's partly why he lost to Qadrian in the final, but it's partly why he won against Stephen. He didn't make any mistakes, was biding his time whenever he got to his feet. Second round, cracked him again with the uppercut, dropped Stephen late. I had it 2017 to Alexander Luff, obviously 2 rounds. But I thought he looked brilliant. He looked dangerous. He looked like he didn't really exhaust himself too much. Improved to 7-1 and advanced to the final, where of course Shirzad Qadrian was waiting. And that final was quite interesting actually, because one of the judges gave Alexander Luff the fight. One of the judges scored it 29-28 to Luff, and then it was 29-28 Qadrian and 30-27 Qadrian. I personally scored it 30-27 Qadrian. I thought that in the first round, again, like it was the single leg that we saw against Maia, but Alexander Luff isn't the athlete that Maia is. That Maia is extremely athletic and made it difficult for Qadrian to get the initial takedowns. Luff didn't offer a great deal of resistance in those initial entries, and Qadrian just looked like he was just in his bag, for lack of a better term. Getting Luff down again, the single leg was just automatic the entire fight. Managed to take the back a few times in the first round to attack the rear naked choke, but Luff does well fighting the hands, like I mentioned. He did against Stephen to prevent the choke really from sinking in. Round two, more of the same. But the coolest part of round two was that, Luff does catch Qadrian right at the beginning and goes for a flying knee. But again, Qadrian, like he did against Maya, just ducks underneath it, starts to wrestle. Luff attacks an anaconda standing, which, if you're not going to get that, you're going to probably end up on your back. And he did. And Qadrian kept him there for the rest of the round. Luff was trying to roll through while Qadrian tried to pass guard a few times, or pass into side control, sorry, from half guard. But Qadrian was just comfortable in any position, really, on the ground. Luff did try to set up a triangle at one point, but it was futile. We saw Maya pull off a triangle on Qadrian in round one, which looked quite tight in that first fight, but Qadrian escaped. And then probably the coolest part of round two, and pretty much the fight, was the silhouette stretch at the end from Shirzad Qadrian in round two. Luff was definitely on the cusp of tapping. If he didn't know how much longer was left, I assume his corner was shouting at him because he was just grimacing, and you could see him mentally just, okay, few more seconds, few more seconds, few more seconds. Most people would have tapped, and I think Qadrian had it in pretty tight. And you saw like Luff kind of, you know, walk a bit gingerly back to his corner when the round ended, but Qadrian almost won in the most stylish way possible, and I think it would have probably stopped a lot of people from all the incessant crying at the end of the fight about how boring Qadrian is. Um, but round three, more of the same, right? Attacks the single leg like 20 seconds into the round, gets Luff down. Luff does take top position with a minute to go and does land a few shots on Qadrian, but not enough to swing the round for me. But I don't really disagree if someone gives Luff round three. But the judge who gave it 29-28 to Luff just seems a bit, I don't know. I don't know how you get to that point. But I personally, yeah, I thought Shirzad won with flying colours. First ever Prizefighter winner, bantamweight as well. Massive Kurdish prospect. This guy, 7-1, fighting out of Diesel Gym, just spending the summer with Khabib in Dagestan as well. Khabib's team, bagging himself 50K and a title shot, two grappling clinics. 7-1 now as a pro, and his next fight will be for bantamweight gold. I wrote exhaustively and extensively before this tournament about Qadrian. I had a thread where I did a retrospective of his career. Um, he's a grinder, man. He's an extremely hard worker. And if you're annoyed that he wasn't getting any finishes or didn't finish anyone in this tournament, go watch his other fights, because go watch his fight before this. Like his fight was Emanuele Zaccaria, who's one of the best Italian prospects. Qadrian takes him down in the first round and just pounds him out, gets the first round knockout. So it's not like he's incapable of finishing people and he doesn't have the instinct. But when there's 50K on the line and the guys you're fighting are very dangerous off their backs, or at least offering a lot of resistance, sometimes if they're not trying to work back to their feet, you're going to ground them out and you're going to get your results. So props to Shirzad Qadrian. Couldn't that 50K couldn't have gone to a nicer guy, in all honesty, and I can't wait to see, you know, how he puts that money, either towards family or towards his, enriching his career. And I cannot wait to see the Liam Gittins fight, because I think it's going to be a really tough one for Qadrian, and a tough one for Gittins too. The pace that Qadrian can fight at, if he can keep that up for 25 minutes, then Gittins has a big fight on his hands. But Gittins is very good off his back and incredible on the feet. I think it's going to be a really compelling fight, so I cannot wait for that one. And while we're talking about the Prizefighter tournament, we might as well talk about the alternate bout really quickly before we move on to the rest of the card. Michele Martignoni versus Alessandro Giordano. That was an amazing fight. I've actually put it in my shortlist for fight of the year, and Alessandro Giordano's finish in round three actually goes on my shortlist for finish of the year as well. I was like un I don't even know how to phrase it, but like I was just stunned by how good Alessandro Giordano was. Not because I'm well aware how good this guy is. Don't get me wrong, but Kelly Martignoni is the former champ. Fights with a lot of aggression. Fights with great power as well. He can put anyone's lights out in the blink of an eye. And Alessandro Giordano basically, just stood there and went toe to toe with one of the most dangerous strikers at 135 pounds. Martignoni, first round, I thought a rare one because Martignoni grounded Giordano for pretty much all 5 minutes of the round, and you would have thought, okay, this guy's on top for 5 minutes, he's probably banking the round. But Giordano had the most important and fight ending potential fight ending sequence of that round where he had the head and arm choke from bottom, and Martignoni was like grimacing and his head was turning like all shades of red and purple, and that was probably the most important part of the fight because it kind of dissuaded Martignoni from wrestling more as the fight went on. I scored that 10-9 to Giordano despite fighting off his back. How rare is that someone's on their back for 5 minutes and wins a round? But Martignoni wasn't doing enough on top. Second round, a better one for Martignoni, pressing forward early as he always does, roundhouse to the body, thumping right hands. They started trading, but you could tell Martignoni had the power advantage. Giordano started to find his rhythm late in this round, like the lovely kind of jab into that lead hook to the body. Martignoni swinging for the fences, and it banged him the round. But that ideology or that idea of or that tactic of going in and swinging for the fences of Giordano cost him in round three because Martignoni was not setting his shots up well. He was fighting like he was in a rush, and Giordano just started to find comfort fighting off the back foot. Counter knee, right hand, lead left, so good. Just touching Martignoni up. Two big hooks. Every time Martignoni entered into range, like bang, bang, like he had like two really like powerful, rapid hooks just to kind of dissuade Martignoni from doing that kind of bullish pressing style that he usually likes to enact. And there was a portion there where Martignoni did buckle Giordano with a calf kick, but while he was trying to find some second wind, there was the 1-2 for Giordano, which cut Martignoni open just above the eyebrow. Martignoni did take Giordano down, got caught in a guillotine with less than a minute to go, and that was enough to draw the tap. Alessandro Giordano is legit. I know he obviously had the two losses in a row in Cage Warriors, and I know that some people were a bit low on him, but it's clear that he's very very good. 8-3 now, the biggest win of his career over the former bantamweight champion, a guy that a lot of people thought was gonna, when he was announced as the prizefighter competitor, if you had to, you know, survey 100 people who avidly watch Cage Warriors, I think the majority would have been saying that Martignoni's going to win the whole thing. So the fact that he was an alternate and the fact that he got handily beaten and submitted by fellow countrymen as well. I know there was a bit of bad blood there, or just like a competitive edge because you want to be like the best Italian guy at your weight class. Um, yeah, Giordano just put a pace on him and was the matador, right? Like Martignoni was the bull pressing forward, and Giordano excellent footwork, fighting off the back foot. It's very very impressive from Alessandro Giordano. So props to him. It's a shame, obviously, a performance that good. He might have had the best performance of anyone in the prizefighter tournament. But obviously, if there are no injuries, he's never going to get his way into the final. So can't wait to see Alessandro Giordano again. And hopefully, it would be lovely to see Giordano against someone who lost in this tournament. Like, how about Giordano Steven or Giordano Luff? These would be great fights. So maybe that's something that Ian Dean is already kind of mulling over. But let's swiftly move on because there's so many other fights to talk about on this card. In the co-main event, we had Jordan Vucenic versus Adrian Kepa. Kepa, just one of those hard-nosed Polish vets, 20 fights with some boxing experience, 14 of his 20 fights ending via finish. But it seemed very much like if Vucenic was on, he was gonna do bad things to this man, and all it took was 90 seconds, or probably even less than 90 seconds, like maybe like 80 seconds. Vucenic obviously early, switching stances like he does, pumping the left jab. There was a calf kick that just froze Adrian Kepa. Kepa shoots on Vucenic after another calf kick, so clearly he was feeling something he didn't like. And if you're going to shoot on Vucenic, shoot with your head on the outside, because shoot with it on the inside and Vucenic is going to snatch your neck and tap you with a guillotine. That's exactly what happened. Vucenic just made light work of this guy, improving to 13-2, submission number 6, 4 submissions in a row, 4 wins in a row as well. UFC, man, you guys need to pull your finger out and get this man on a card. None of that contender series bullshit. I want to see Jordan Vucenic. I don't want to see him step in on such short notice for that Manchester card, though I know he would. But that Paris card, they really should be looking to give him a match, get him signed. We're wasting valuable years of his career now, fighting people who he's clearly much better than. Like this guy Adrian Kepper, no disrespect to him, but just sometimes you get these matchups and you think, okay, maybe Vucenic might get clipped, or maybe he might be a bit cocky, or he might underestimate his opponent. But now, like Vucenic is locked in, he's switched on, and he's going to treat these people like they're lesser than him in the cage, and they are. So hopefully, I always say it's like, oh, I can't wait to see Jordan Vucenic fight again, but I can't. But I really hope it's not in Cage Warriors, which probably counterproductive for this podcast, but I think it's just a waste of his career at this point. I think he needs the UFC, or PFL or something like that. We had the people's main event, Jer Harris versus Jawany Scott. I loved this fight so much. This was a grappler's delight, one of my favorite fights of the year, without a doubt. Jawany Scott, 4-1. Jer Harris, 5-1. GB top team versus Team Rhino. Two guys who crushed it, um, in recent years, have absolutely crushed it. Jawany Scott took a bunch of years off between amateur and pro, doing boxing and pursuing other ventures. But I'm so glad he's back in MMA, because this fight was unreal. The level of just the technical level of both guys on the ground, the scrambles, Jawany Scott's just pure athleticism, the way that the guy's just able to keep his balance on his feet, like bouncing on one leg or getting taken down and just popping right back up. It's unreal. And I don't know that GB Top Team realize how big of a gem they have on their hands. I mean, I'm sure they do, but I think Jawany Scott is unreal and one of the best fighters in the UK at 125 pounds. And that's saying a lot, because Jer Harris, by the way, also one of the best flyweights, not just out of Ireland, but in Europe. One of the most exciting guys who can fight at an exhaustive pace, can knock people out, can submit people, um, doesn't quit in a fight when things don't go his way. Like, go watch his last fight against Wamitan. Things might not go his way, but he's still there in people's faces trying to get the finish. And this one was really compelling. I loved it. I scored it 29-28 to Jawany Scott. I thought the third round was the clearest of the round. Not only did Scott dominate on the ground, but he was landing some good shots. However the hell the first two rounds were scored, I didn't really care at any point. I was happy with either guy getting the win here, but I had it 29-28 Scott. He fought at an insane pace, and that pace that, you could argue Joe Harris set. Joe Harris set that pace in the first round, because that's kind of the level he was going at. He was shooting, attacking these takedowns, and he set that pace, but he couldn't keep it for 15 minutes. Jawany Scott clearly had the cardio advantage in that third round. It looked like it could have gone longer. But yeah, 29-28 Scott. I'm so glad he decided to return to MMA, turn pro. He's 13-1-1 as a pro and amateur combined. And this Jer Harris win, I promise you, is going to age like fine wine, because Jer Harris is legit. Left a good account of himself here, like the way he was wrestling up, the Granby roll, the counters on the ground, the way that neither of these guys were accepting. Like, if a guy was in their guard, they were just not even trying to lock them in their guard, immediately trying to wrestle up. There was a butterfly guard sweep at some point from Jawany Scott in this. Just, yeah, it was just unreal. It's hard to talk about these types of fights without visual aid, because people are just listening to me mentioning random, grappling terms, but it's just awesome, man. Like the little X guard as well, the way that both of these guys were just getting back to their feet. Honestly, if you enjoy grappling, if you like grappling, this is one of the best fights of the year. Um, Not just Cage Warriors, but in general, you saw two. This is what, Mark Goddard tweeted it after the fight, or maybe after a couple of rounds. He said, "This is what high level MMA looks like," and that's exactly it. And people will turn their nose up at anything that isn't UFC. But what Jer Harris and Jawany Scott did was unreal. Props to Jawany Scott. Cannot wait to see him again. I hope it doesn't take too long. And Jer Harris, same goes for him. I'd love for, this matchup was always going to derail one guy, not in a dramatic way, but it was always going to knock one of these guys back. So it's a shame it had to happen. But I think Joe Harris has the mentality, has the mindset, and has all the capabilities in the world to bounce back immediately in his next fight. Whereas for Jawany Scott, you have to imagine the way he's fighting, the pace at which he fights, the quality he has. Probably like two or three more fights in this guy's in title contention, and especially if he starts finishing people as well, like he did against Sean Matos. I could really see this guy in the next 18 months really making a push at 125 pounds. We'll swiftly move on to James Webb's light heavyweight debut against Adam Bieganski. A really interesting fight here. I thought James Webb looked good at 205 pounds. It wasn't an exciting fight by any stretch of the imagination, but James Webb's footwork looked really good. Defensively sound, moving really well, kept the pace that he wanted to fight at. Neither guy really striking in combination though, so it was a bit dull. I think the third round was probably the best round, and that was actually a Bieganski round. Adam Bieganski with some bare knuckle experience and some boxing experience, and it really showed in round three. His jab was splitting Webb's guard. I think cut him open at one point. Webb did land some good stuff as well, shifting uppercut, a nice one too. But Bieganski just using his jab to fill the distance, smashing the overhand over the top. If he'd fought like that earlier in the fight, it might have. I'm not saying he would have won, but it probably would have created a more exciting environment. But it really was a dull fight. James Webb, I scored at 29-28 his way. A former middleweight champ, of course, getting his hand raised in his inaugural light heavyweight bout. He looked massive in there. Like he looked like he'd skipped light heavyweight and gone straight to heavyweight. Um, Very interested to see what this light heavyweight run looks like for James Webb. We know that his chin hasn't always held up at 185 pounds. Perhaps this new move, he does look quicker, less I don't know, less cumbersome. Even though he's like upper weight class, it just looks like he's comfortable there. And 205 is such a thin weight class in Cage Warriors that we could probably, especially him being a former champion, you can imagine probably one, maybe two more fights, and he's probably right there, getting crack at a second belt. Ryan Shelley versus Nik Bagley was a fight that I'd been tipping for weeks as a fight of the year candidate. I thought these guys were going to go hammer and tongs, scramble a hell of a lot on the ground, and the fight lasted less than 3 minutes. Nik Bagley getting his hand raised via submission yet again. Um, just unbelievable, really. Like GB top team, another gem on their hands. Making quick work of Ryan Shelley like that is insane, especially on the ground. 5-1 now as a pro is Nik Bagley. All of his wins via submission. He's got a knockout finish in there, but it's against Andy Nunn, who's like a well-known jobber in the UK MMA circuit. So that's kind of a fight that's ineligible. Well, not kind of, it is ineligible on Bagley's record, unfortunately. But if it did count, it'd be 6-1. It'd still be all finishes, but it'd be a TKO in there as well. But the submission game of Nik Bagley is unreal. It was great in this because he looked mean early, backed Shelley up with a jab, and I thought, okay, they're going to start kind of unloading now. But he backed him up with a jab, got him against the fence, body lock takedown. Took the back from half guard, then started. Well, he was in half guard and kind of trying to attack the back. Got the head and arm choke at a really weird angle, but really it wasn't to get any submission bills to force Shelley to commit to giving up his back. And then Bagley just got his arm across the chin and cranked away. It's gone down as a rear naked choke. I don't actually think that the arm was under the neck. It just looked like he was just cranking on his jaw and just looked really uncomfortable. But Nik Bagley, yeah, he's one of the guys I see people who don't watch Cage Warriors talk about him as a really exciting prospect. I think Zane Simon, for people who follow Zane, has Bagley as one of his kind of guys to watch this year outside of the UFC. So it's clear that Bagley's making waves beyond just the people who watch Cage Warriors or who watch UK MMA. And yeah, I mean, that one was so quick, we could probably see him turn around again very, very soon. As for Ryan Shelley, obviously 7-3 now, did really well to bounce back into the win column, but another loss for him. That's 3 losses in the last, 14, 15 months. But the people he's losing to, Tobias Harila, Geordie Backers, and then Nik Bagley, these aren't easy fights for Ryan Shelley, and he's a guy who's going to say yes to every single fight. I'd love to see him scale it back a bit, maybe fight down a little bit more, stop taking on these guys, maybe build a streak and then come back to these mad fights. But yeah, Ryan Shelley's always going to be value, good value, and for entertainment whenever he's in there. But Nik Bagley seems to be the truth, and GB Top Team, I think it's a matter of time, and it's pending for them to have another Cage Warriors champion because they've got a few people knocking on the door quite heavily. We then had Milad Ahady versus Thomas Paul. Milad Ahady, everyone who's listened to this podcast knows, and you've probably already skipped it the minute I said Milad Ahady. Everyone knows this is my guy, one of my favorite prospects in MMA in general. Forget UK MMA, forget any kind of segregation here. In all MMA, Milad Ahadi's one of my favorites. Improves to 8-1 here with a absolutely beautiful wrestling clinic. One of the, one of those where you watch the fight and you're like, how on earth has he made grappling look that easy? Something that's so exhaustive, something that has so much resistance in it. And Thomas Paul, who's a good defensive grappler and by no means a slouch, right? Milad Ahady just took him apart and made it look effortless. I can't remember the last time I saw grappling that smooth, or just wrestling, sorry, that smooth. Forget like grappling in terms of submission attempts and all of that, but in terms of wrestling and takedowns, Milad Ahady was just flowing in there, um, dipping really well, like level changing at the perfect time. Had the timing of Thomas Paul. Whenever Paul would commit to throw in something, he would just duck underneath, lift Paul up effortlessly, and just dump him on his head over and over and over again for 3 rounds. In this second round, you know, all the rounds went the same. It was Ahady getting Thomas Paul down immediately and keeping him there, wrestling him. Whenever Thomas Paul got up, Ahady would just again get to the legs, get his grips in, and just dump Thomas Paul on his head. But the second round was really good because it was all of that control. And Ahady had already won the first round 10-9. I didn't score it a 10-8 because there just wasn't enough damage or submission attempts to warrant it. But the second round I did score a 10-8 for him because he lands a nasty head kick on Thomas Paul. And the reason I'm talking about it is that, if you were watching on the broadcast, Thomas Paul, the way the camera was positioned is, Ahady lands this head kick and Thomas Paul like falls out of frame, and it looked like, okay, this is a face plant KO. I was getting ready to start typing and getting all my notes in, and then you just see Thomas Paul kind of recover and just start circling with. I don't know how he ate that head kick basically, but Ahady spears him down after that like a proper like rhino gore from back in the old wrestling days, and just grounds him beautifully. But he did enough in that round to get the 10-8. And then in round 3, glancing on another head kick, again lifting Paul and just drowning him on the mat. Effortless. Paul did get a chance to swing for the fences with a few seconds to go, but Ahady literally just charged forward and slammed him down again. Just an effortless grappling clinic. 30-26 for Milad Ahady. 8-1 now. 5-0 in Cage Warriors. Yeah, I think we're ready to see Milad Ahady in title contention. I think it's inevitable at this point. He's an amazing grappler, and we compare this to Qadrian, where Qadrian's pace is exhaustive and he's working hard for every takedown, which is fine because it's a pace he can keep. But you compare it to someone like Ahady, where everything is just chained together beautifully. The technique is unreal. I think Ahady is a future champ. You can lock that in. I've been saying it for almost 2 years. I think Ahady's a future champ. I think he's a future UFC fighter, and could do some big things because his striking is brilliant. We're talking about his wrestling, but the guy butters his bread with pretty much his kickboxing, right? So yeah, Milad Ahadi's the truth, guys, and I've been saying it for ages. And I'll stop talking about it now because I know a lot of people probably sat there like, here this guy goes again on the Milad Ahady hype train. But we're running out of tickets and we're running out of seats for the hype train, so come get them while you can. So that was the main card portion um, of Cage Warriors 174, and I'm conscious of the fact that we're 40 minutes into this podcast, which I knew was going to happen. But we'll work our way through the prelims now, which were wild and insane, and we had lots of finishes. So start with the prelim headliner, which was Imad Buamri versus Jimmy Quinn. Buamri making his Cage Warriors debut, 6-6, 1.5 years, sorry, since his last bout, coming off a KO loss. This was pretty much a setup for Jimmy Quinn. And look, you need that when you first start out. I mean, what else? Who else do you want him to fight when he's only had 3 pro fights? He's fighting a 12-fight veteran, so you need them to have these tests. I know a lot of people look at that and like, oh, he's crushed another can, but that's 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 matchmaking for you when people have just started out in their careers. You need to see how they'll go against someone who's been in a cage 12 times. All right, they might not have the most appealing record, but they've still won as much as they've lost. So they're clearly capable of doing something. But Jimmy Quinn didn't really care about that. 60 seconds, that's all it took for him. Kicking the calf early. Buamri seemed to not like one of them, turned his back after a calf kick, and Jimmy Quinn just went and landed a crushing flying knee, some follow up shots, and the referee stepped in and stopped it. That's 10 fights now as a pro and amateur combined for Jimmy Quinn. Still hasn't seen a scorecard. As a pro now, improves to 3-1. Um, I tweeted this after the fight, but by the time he retires, his highlight reel is probably going to be longer than the amount of time he spent in the cage, because almost every time Jimmy Quinn goes out there, I mean, his pro debut was him scoring the fastest KO in Cage Warriors history. As an amateur, he was knocking people out with spinning hook kicks to the head. Um, just yeah, the guy's got a crazy like proclivity for finishing fights, and that's always good to see. Whereas for his opponent Imad Buamri, just yeah, was a lamb to the slaughter, which is a test that Jimmy Quinn needed, but he passed it with flying colours the way he was supposed to. So that's 3-1 now for Jimmy Quinn. I look forward to seeing what he does next. We had Rafael Aronov versus Jamie Richardson, a fight that I thought would be completely wild, and in that first round, Jamie Richardson looked really good. Definitely won the first round, was doing great work to the body that Aronov wasn't liking. But then in the second round, Aronov dropped Richardson with an uppercut and then followed him to the ground. And Richardson looked, I don't know, like they were talking about on the broadcast, like did he break his arm, or was he injured, or was he compromised in any way? I just think that the uppercut landed flush on his nose, and that probably just, when you've had as many fights as Jamie has had, um, he probably just felt something that he didn't like, and it just froze him for a second. Like I think where I don't know, maybe he did hurt his arm. I've not actually had a chance to go and look, but just talking from what I saw, just as almost like an immediate reaction is, we were obviously doing a lot of like narrative around what happened, but what happened is that he just got caught with a flush uppercut to the nose, and it probably broke something. It probably felt uncomfortable, and it froze him a bit. And Aronov managed to get the submission in round two. Um, Aronov obviously coming off that banging fight of Emil Brown back in March, where he lost, but he looked quite good. He dropped Emil as well, and obviously won in his debut as an underdog against Ben Petch's Kelly. Jamie Richardson, obviously an absolute Cage Warriors vet. That was his 15th fight in the promotion. Love watching the guy fight, but it's another unfortunate loss for Jamie Richardson. That's 4 in a row for him now in terms of losses. As for Aronov, I won't spend too long kind of talking him up for reasons that go beyond fighting. I just the way he carried himself in the cage after it, like shoving those Israel flags in people's faces, middle fingers up to the crowd. It just yeah, I'm not surprised that this guy's a fucking Fed. So, yeah, we'll leave the politics and all of that for another time. But yeah, Rafael Aronov improves to 6-5, um, and Jamie Richardson, unfortunately, seems to be kind of on his way out, which is a shame to say, as he's one of my favorite Cage Warriors fighters. We had a great kind of battle of the prospects in Gheorge Grozav versus Tommy Brunning. Tommy Brunning, a guy I've been covering for ages, former bantamweight and featherweight champion in the amateur scene for Cage Warriors. Debuted last year, or debuted this year even in March, and won via first round TKO. Just a beast of a prospect, really adept grappler and striker. And Gheorge Grozav, a guy that I wasn't incredibly familiar with, but for those who follow Paul Brown on Twitter, Paul Brown's probably, in all honesty, probably the hardest working person in all of MMA. He's always doing something, but he's been talking up Grozav for a while, and this came as no surprise to him. Came as a surprise to me because I'm dumb as bricks, and I was just thinking Tommy Brunning was going to run this guy over because I wasn't too familiar with Grozav. I'm not as ingrained and entrenched in the Irish MMA scene as naturally a lot of the Irish folks. But um, yeah, I'm on the Grozav hype train already because this fight was unreal. He looked so good. That takedown that Grozav gets, even before we get to that, like Brunning was doing some good things like glancing head kick, elbow in the clinch, but Grozav was just in that collar tie, in that clinch, just wanting to grapple and wanting to get Brunning down. And then in round two, he basically manages to get it, um, gets the takedown with the body lock, or not round two, sorry, it was round one. Um, it's very late in round one. Grozav gets his body lock in, pulls Brunning down, goes straight into half guard with 90 seconds to go, starts attacking the ninja choke, and then realizes that there's an opening for a Kimura, switches to that and draws the tap to improve to 2-0 and deal Tommy Brunning the first loss of his career as a pro and an amateur combined. Yeah, Gheorge Grozav, I'm on the hype train already. The adopted Irishman, I think he's clearly very good, and to do that to Tommy Brunning is no mean feat, and it's a win that will age really well on Grozav's career, on his record even. I'm very excited to see how they match up Grozav next, who they put him in there. A very quick fight. We could see him on another card soon if he's willing to kind of make the jump again. But at 135, it looks like we've got a really big prospect on our hands, and I think that the Irish folks who listen to this will be very, very happy about that. We then had the Battle of the Haircuts, Sergio Gavinelli versus Craig Edwards, two guys with a very, very nice trim, with the mullets and the hair hanging out at the back. But this one lasted 45 seconds, and it was absolutely fucking mental. Gavinelli, just as a quick intro, was on my shortlist for newcomer of the year until this fight, where he obviously um, earlier in the year in March won via knockout in a really violent and dramatic fashion, 5-2 as a pro. Craig Edwards returns to Cage Warriors after 5 years away fighting in other promotions. He's rattled off 4 wins in a row coming into this fight with a record of 6-4. But consider that he'd fought Mehdi Ben Lakdar, Mason Jones, and George Hardwick in his pro debut. It doesn't get tougher than that. But this fight was unreal because Gavinelli seemed to drop Edwards early, or Edwards slipped. There was something there. Edwards quickly recovered, followed Gavinelli around the cage, just backed him up with some winging shots, and then clobbered him with a huge step in elbow. Nasty technique, nasty finish. One of the best finishes we've seen this year. So it's another that I added to my shortlist. Um, just absolute insanity. A guy who started his career 1-3 is now 7-4 with 5 wins in a row. Worth keeping our eyes on him at welterweight because Gavinelli's really good, and Craig Edwards just put him out to pasture with that elbow. A really nice finish. And that kind of wraps up the prelims portion because obviously we had all the Prizefighter fights within the prelims, the semifinals and the alternate bout, but we've already spoken about those. So we'll kind of transition really smoothly, he says, as he doesn't transition smoothly, into Gerasimos Sutis versus Nicholas LeBlond, early prelim fight. Nicholas LeBlond wins this via decision in no pretty fashion, in comfortable fashion, but in no way the violent manner in which we're used to watching Nicholas LeBlond fight. I was searching the CW174 hashtag during, after the fight even, and I was just seeing folks who clearly don't know what's going on, being like, "Oh, this LeBlond guy's a bum. How's he not, crushing this 5-6 can?" As often people do when all they do is bet on MMA and look at Tapology and don't actually watch fights, and then get really angry when things happen that they don't understand because they've put zero effort into trying to understand it. Nicholas LeBlanc was supposed to fight for the title against Shaj on this card, and then about a week ago was Shaj pulled out due to injury, and Amir Malikpour stepped in, interim title fight then for LeBlanc. So he went from a title fight to an interim title fight, and then Malikpour pulls out a few days before this card, and LeBlanc goes from fighting for gold, fighting for interim gold, to fighting as the headliner on the early prelims against a guy that, with all due respect, we hadn't really heard of. Sutis is 5-6 coming into this, but 4 wins in a row. Started his career 0-5, so clearly he's found some momentum later on in his career. But look, we all want to see LeBlanc get mad finishes, right? Like, I'm the guy who was literally posting edits of LeBlanc nuking people and bulldog choking people before this fight. But it's a tricky one for LeBlanc. Try and put yourself in his shoes. He knows if he comes in here and overcommits, overextends, and loses, there goes his title shot. Sutis wasn't making LeBlanc work hard. LeBlanc was fighting on the outside and just winning a slow-paced fight, for sure. But he was landing all the best shots and he was winning. I had it 30-27 LeBlanc. Look, he played it safe, in my opinion, grappled heavily in the second and third round and eased over the line. Got it by any means necessary, improves to 11-4, 5 wins in a row, just rebooked the Shaj fight. As for Sutis, props to him for stepping up in what could have been a very dangerous and violent fight for him. Steps up, yeah, and has a fight with Nicholas LeBlanc. Do we see him again? Probably not. But as for LeBlanc, I mean, if you're shitting on that, then you need to kind of appreciate the context, because I don't think that there's anything there worth shitting on. We then had a strawweight bout between Jennifer Trioro and Rhi-Rhi Hudson. Rhi-Rhi Hudson, one of my favorite amateur fighters, finally making her pro debut after multiple fight cancellations. She was supposed to debut in November last year, had 2 fight cancellations, had another one in March this year, or April. But finally, we're here. And what do we know about Rhi-Rhi Hudson? Former Cage Warriors Academy atomweight and strawweight champ, as an amateur, of course. Nasty Muay Thai base, has fought pro in Muay Thai many a times. And her opponent, Jennifer Trioro, debuted in Cage Warriors at 0-4. Was supposed to be a lamb to the slaughter for Sinead Ninoilan, the Irish prospect, but beat her as the biggest underdog on the card. So came into this, potentially someone who would be an easy step up for Rhi-Rhi. But we saw against Sinead Ninoilan, she was supposed to be an easy step up, and Ninoilan failed that. So it's not always as easy as it seems. But Rhi-Rhi Hudson, 12-second KO. They put it at 13 seconds, but it was 12 seconds. Don't listen to the haters. She was effectively 3 seconds away from having the fastest KO in Cage Warriors history. Swarmed Trioro early, calf kick, whiffs on the left hand, then lands a right hand from hell over the top to drop her opponent. Big shots against the fence on the ground, and referee stepped in. Rhi-Rhi Hudson now 1-0 as a pro, and if you thought that was a fluke, go watch Rhi-Rhi Hudson's amateur fights, because all she does is knock people out in quick and dramatic fashion. The fact that she fights at strawweight, doesn't even tip the scales at strawweight. She came in at 112 pounds to carry the power that she does. That's pretty scary. Someone worth keeping an eye on in this weight class. I know Cage Warriors probably don't have as big a roster as they could have when it comes to female fighters, but Rhi-Rhi is someone that you probably start to build around ASAP, because she's got the charisma, she's got the personality, she can bang in there as well, and she's very athletic. So yeah, I can't wait to see how they match make her in future fights and where her career goes from here. Jordan Little versus Daniel Crooks May was a really cool one. Jordan Little, a guy I'm really high on, 25 fights as an amateur, won his pro debut in Cage Warriors in April against Jordan Strong in a really, really fun one. So I was excited for this one. Daniel Crooks May, returning to MMA after almost 2 years out, lost his pro debut via first round submission. So you had 1-0 versus 0-1, and Crooks May steps in here on short notice. And this fight was amazing until the unfortunate way in which it ended. Of course, what I'm referring to is the knee to the grounded opponent from Daniel Crooks May, which, yes, within the rule books, fine. It ended as a no contest due to that knee. But my feeling on this, as you all know, is, if you're posting on one hand and you're playing a dangerous game, it it just you shouldn't be able to do that, in my opinion. Like the knee should have counted, and as in an ideal world, it counts. Not that it should have counted, because within the rule book, it shouldn't, and that's fine. But I know that there's some voting going on Wednesday, this coming week, about legalizing or looking at 12 to 6 elbows, and then also knees to grounded opponents. So, hopefully we can see a positive change for MMA, because Daniel Crooksmate, it feels like, was almost, again, it's hard to say robbed of a win, because technically he shouldn't. That's not a technique that's legal. But it's funny that from Wednesday onwards, if they come to some sort of agreement, I don't know the intricacies of the voting that's going on, but from Wednesday onwards, if they're like, hey, grounded knees are cool now, Daniel Crooksmay was a few days shy of having a win on his record. So it's a bit of a tough one, but the fight itself was really, really good. Jordan Little was so unorthodox. He was like throwing these like chopping backhands and switching stances and landing a capoeira kick. But Crooksmay was, while he lost the first round, you felt like he was starting to find his distance and starting to figure out the pace at which Little fights. He realized that punching in combination is what kind of freezes Little up. If he goes with the single shots with a single right hand that he kept going for in round one, it's not going to land, or it's not going to be of much consequence. The minute he started combining his shots, chain wrestling off his shots, that's when Jordan Little started to struggle. So an unfortunate way for the fight to end. It was really good between two up and coming English fighters, but unfortunately ends in a not so nice way. I'd like to see them rematch it potentially, but the level of that knee that Jordan Little ate, like no one was going to recover from that. Like it wasn't just like a little knee to the head. Like that thing was a knockout blow. So I don't know that the timelines will add up, but I'd love to see Crooks May perhaps just get in there and fight again, because he didn't really take any damage, instead of waiting to put this fight together again. But yeah, be interesting to see what they do there. The other women's MMA fight on this card was between Camilla Bergstrom and Eimear Darcy. Eimear Darcy, big Irish prospect, won in her pro debut earlier this year against Jenny Lyon via first round finish. It's kind of what she does. If you saw her at amateur level, she's a prolific finisher. She's someone who hits quite hard. And yeah, this was another layup for Darcy, though I have to be honest. Like the Jenny Line fight was a layup, and this one was too. Camilla Bergstrom, making her pro debut, went 1-7 as an amateur, lost every single fight in the Cage Warriors Academy circuit. They set Darcy up for a show, and look, and Darcy delivered. I hate saying stuff like this, right? But I tweeted after the fight, I was like, Camilla Bergstrom should not be fighting pro, like at all. And it was really evident in this fight. Obviously, Darcy bonks her and batters her on the ground, wobbles her on the feet. That whole ground sequence comes from Bergstrom attempting a takedown, but then falling over and letting Darcy just fall straight into mount. I mean, it was borderline negligent to have Bergstrom in there against Darcy, but I also understand that you can't forget the amateur stuff. Obviously, I mean it's 0-0 versus 1-0. Like it's not like it's the worst matchup ever. But when you see Bergstrom fight, in no world should she be fighting as a pro. Potentially even as an amateur, but I think that amateur anyone should be able to fight, so long as it's consensual and they're healthy enough to do so. But yeah, Eimear Darcy 2-0 now as a pro. Props to her, but I want to see her against some more credible opposition in the near future. Giacomo Michaelis versus Mush Aslani delivered yet another finish for us on a card that had plenty of finishes, and this one was a pretty fun one. Mush Aslani looked really good in round one, actually, being able to get the trip takedown, going into half guard, passing to side control, trying to work a crucifix position as well at one point. He looked really good on the ground, but and it was like a relentless, kind of like the Qadrian fight against Maia, and well, more against Maia, but it was just like a relentless pace that Aslani was trying to set. But when you don't have the gas tank, you keep fighting like that, you're eventually going to break. And in round two, Giacomo Michaelis definitely broke Aslani. Aslani was marching forward, breathing heavily, hands down, looking sluggish. Michaelis started landing clean. What I love about Michaelis is he started going to the body immediately, just, roundhouse to the body, push kicks to the body, digging his toes into the midsection of Aslani. Big left hook in there, wobbled Aslani. And then it was a patient approach from Michaelis. He wasn't rushing him. He was just allowing Aslani to press and then just kind of punishing him whenever he entered. Michaelis drops in with a glancing left hand, a heap of follow-up shots, and Rich Mitchell decided he'd seen enough. Aslani was protesting the stoppage, which I thought was, I mean, it's always going to happen. Fighters, egos, blah, blah, blah. But in no chance in hell was that an early stoppage. Aslani was done by the time he dropped. And I think Rich Mitchell gave him more than enough of a chance. But if you're, you know, if you're giving up your back like that and you're not fighting back, and the minute that the guy comes off and is taken off you because the ref stopped the fight, that's when you start trying to wrestle up. It doesn't look good. But as for Giacomo Michaelis, another cool Italian prospect, 2-0 now in Cage Warriors, 6-1 as a pro, so someone worth keeping an eye on. Francesco Mazzeo versus Vanderlei Jr. was insane. Vanderlei Jr. stepping in on short notice to fight Mazzeo at 205 pounds, but weighed 191 pounds. So as you could tell, it was a short notice one, and Mazzeo looked twice the size of Vanderlei Jr. and within 37 seconds, Matteo had given us one of the knockouts of the year, as both fighters traded spinning back fists. Matteo whiffed on his and then just landed a stonking left hand over the top to stop Junior 37 seconds into the fight. One hitter quitter, walk-off KO, a brutal one. Matteo improves to 4-0, which is good because he's had a weird Cage Warriors run up until this point. Like, he's won both fights, but his debut was won via his opponent trying to post on a takedown and breaking his arm. And then in the second fight was a DQ win for Mazzeo because Angus Hewitt? I think it was Angus Hewitt. Well, Angus Hewitt had the illegal, yeah, it was Angus Hewitt. Thank you, Tapology. Illegal knee to Mazzeo while he was grounded, and Hewitt had already been warned for it, so it went as a DQ win in Mazzeo's way. So for him to get a finish like this is really good because he kind of needed something that wasn't utterly bizarre. And actually, what he got was one of the KOs of the year. So props to the 4-0 Italian prospect. One of my favorite fights on the card coming into it was actually the early prelim opener, which is mental that on a card this good, it goes to show really that a card this good would have Matthew Elliott versus Luca Barando as the very first fight on the card, and it set a really good tone. Luca Barando comes into this fight 4-0, last two wins via KO, big Italian prospect with some good wins, whereas Matthew Elliott 3-1, a terrifying grappler. His only loss was to Ryan Shelley, also on this card. And Shelley, of course, it was a split decision, and it was a really contentious split decision loss for Matthew Elliott. But other than that, 3-1, like I said, coming off an arm triangle finish over Valentino Riva earlier in the year. And this was really a fight of a classic striker versus grappler, and the grappler won in quite impressive fashion. I mean, in the first round, I scored it 10-9 to Barando. I thought that while Elliott looked comfortable in the striking department and really improved there, like I was loving the front kick, the double jab. Barando kind of took over halfway through the round, counter knee to the body, hook into the body, straight left hand. He was landing the more concussive strikes, but Matthew Elliott looked the cleanest and most comfortable I'd seen him look on the feet in his whole career up until this point. And then round two, Elliott immediately goes to the takedown. Body lock. We saw a lot of body locks on this card and a lot of successful wrestling entries through the body lock. And that's exactly what got Matthew Elliott his win. Really, what spelled the end for Luca Barando was, he gets that body lock, manages to drag Barando down. Barando was showing good takedown defense, and even in this round, there was like a roundhouse to the body from Elliott, which he used to get deep on the hips of Barando. But eventually, Elliott manages to wear Barando out, brings him down with a double leg, takes his back. 90 seconds of the round left, manages to sink in the body triangle, pounds away at Barando's head, sinks in the rear naked choke and draws the submission. First person to beat Luca Barando, a nice second round rear naked choke. I've been saying it for a while, but I think Matthew Elliott's the real deal. He's had some inactivity, he's had obviously the loss to Shelley, but once fights hit the ground, this guy's almost impossible to deal with. Another submission win, 4-1 now for the Northern Irish prospect. Yeah, just excited to see Matthew Elliott in there again. And well, I've been talking now for an hour and some change, an hour and 5 minutes. By the time I edit this, I'll probably lose 2, 3 minutes from just all the random coughing and noises that I have to block out when I record. But yeah, Cage Warriors 174, just a rip roaring success. The Prizefighter tournament was brilliant. The fights were compelling. Some of the finishes on this card, the quality of the fights, the quality of the grappling, of the striking. This was a really good showcase for UK MMA. A great showcase for European MMA too, but a great one for UK MMA. A guy like Shirzad Qadrian, who, yes, he's doing a summer camp in Dagestan and all of that, and he's Iranian, but a guy who really cuts his teeth at Diesel Gym in London, in the Docklands. And him being able to, put in all of that work with the wrestling and everything, representing the UK as well as Iran, just amazing. A guy like Jawany Scott putting in work and winning in the way he did. Nik Bagley, Jordan Vucenic, Milad Ahady, Jimmy Quinn, so many great ones. Craig Edwards as well. Like I'm probably missing a few people. Rhi-Rhi Hudson, just awesome, right? Like this was a good showcase for UK MMA, and 20 fights is. I don't ever look forward to talking about 20 fights on a podcast because I know I'm going to sit here for ages. But this one was very enjoyable and it was really fun being able to watch it and just talk about it, really. And we go again on Thursday because Thursday, Cage Warriors are in Manchester, setting up this nice double header with the UFC on the weekend. Another 20, I believe there's 21 fights on that card, headlined by, of course, Dario Belandi defending his middleweight title against Robin Russ. Classic striker versus grappler there. And again, some really awesome fights like Mason Jones is on this card. Stefano Paterno's on this card, which I'm really, really excited about. Matthew Camilleri versus Sabatino. That's going to be just awesome, awesome grappling on display. Mastro Giacomo versus Musavi. Musavi just, I can't wait for his Cage Warriors debut. He's a big, big prospect. Jack Axworthy, big next gen MMA prospect here as well. Michelangelo Lupoli versus Connor Wilson. Yayan Davies versus Adam Shelley. Jan Quayhagens unfortunately has pulled out of his fight with Harold Cohen, unfortunately due to injury. But you've got other things like Adam Cullen versus Emil Shafiri, Fran Breen, who's one of my newcomers of the year, fighting against David Scorano. Teddy Stringer's back in action. Simone Patrizzi, Dylan Hazan. I'm super hyped for the Manchester card. It's more low key than the London one. You've not got the whole prize fighter, but look, you've got a title on the line. And like I just spent a whole minute talking about some really compelling fights. So I'm excited to kind of jump back in there and be able to kind of break that one down for you guys. And thanks to everyone who's listened to this for as long as you have, and all the support generally this week. I've kind of been going in a bunch of threads on Twitter, a bunch of videos I've been editing, and I plan to do that more often. Really, like I feel like I neglect that side of the podcast a little bit. Like I prioritize more the audio and the recording more than all the social media stuff. So definitely appreciate everyone's showing love and supporting because it is a bit more time consuming, but it's definitely enjoyable and it's nice to see that people like it. So yeah, thanks again for listening, guys. Remember that you can leave a review on Apple, on Spotify. You can comment on YouTube. You can do a bunch of things. Support the podcast, share it. We're the only podcast covering Cage Warriors exclusively. Technical breakdowns, not just here's who's fighting this weekend, 7-0 versus 2-3. We're doing some valuable, I hope, analysis and fight breakdowns. So if you enjoy that, just be sure to kind of spread the word and let's get the podcast kind of out there to more and more people. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you all. My breakdown Cage Warriors 175 this coming week.